Ellis, in partnership with the Florida Botanical Gardens, presents Gianlanella in the Gardens, featuring artist Don Gianella's assemblage sculptures. Join us for a virtual tour of 3 artworks created from repurposed steel objects reimagined into new forms. The beauty of the Florida Botanical Gardens, located in Largo, Florida, is the ideal environment to showcase these sculptures, bringing a deeper awareness of recycling and the responsible use of discarded material. First on the tour is Plenum Orb, created in 2015. In physics, plenum means a space completely filled with matter. Here, we see a sculpture created from familiar stainless steel items reassembled in a most unfamiliar way. In the reflective orb, you can see hubcaps, pots and pans, dog bowls, vessels of every description. It's as if some cosmic magnet has pulled these objects together to form a perfect sphere. To create the orb, Gianlanella first had to build a symmetrical 4-foot diameter concave plaster mold. The individual objects were then placed one by one and welded into position, constructing a continuous ball out of a palette of dissimilar shaped objects. Walking around is a journey. The sculpture functions as a time capsule that rekindles memories locked up in the abandoned objects. We can look at commonplace items differently. As a result, pondering our consumer-based system, questioning the viability of a disposable culture and what that means for our society and for the future of the environment. Next up is Celestial Fish, a culmination of smaller fish sculptures Gianlanella has been working on for over a decade. Made up of over 500 pounds of welded automobile transmission parts, Celestial Fish stands elegantly on 3 fins. It took over 30 days to create the fish with the aid of several assistants, a welder, plasma cutter, and an overhead hoist. The swirling patterns in the head, fin, and tails were done by hand with an angle grinder. The eyes are a carefully selected assemblage of transmission gears. The tail fin is swept to one side as if captured in a swimming motion. With the sunlight shining behind the sculpture, the field of small perforations that make up the body is illuminated and twinkles like stars. The circular spots on the sides are made from an eclectic combination of gears, pulleys, rings, and car parts. These cosmic spots represent the planets of our solar system. If you look closely, you can find ones that represent Saturn, Mars, Earth, and the Sun. These astronomical images of the planets and stars were the inspiration for the name Celestial Fish, created in 2016. Now, we move to Auto Body Parts Horse, created in 2018. Working with auto body parts, fenders, and quarter panel is a new experience for Gianlanella, who uses them to define space in an interesting way. The idea was to keep the design of this horse gestural and abstract, like a 3-dimensional sketch, using crumpled auto body parts and crude pipes as the sole building materials. To find them, Gianlanella sourced a scrapyard and a pick-the-part automobile graveyard in Clearwater, Florida. Once he got the perfect rusted pipes and 6 dented fenders from wrecked cars, he used a pipe bender and a long lever to build a gentle curve in 1 3/4-inch diameter steel pipes, which would become the front legs. During the process, Gianlanella thought of Archimedes, the Greek inventor and mathematician who said, "Give me a lever long enough and I can lift the world." The thin sheet metal is very malleable, and the finish gets more interesting as it's hammered and bent. Gianlanella treats them as though they were crumpled and torn sheets of paper, roughly delineating the parameters of the horse, establishing mass and adding splashes of color. The crumpling and deformation is also makes the metal more rigid, adding stability to the structure once it's welded. Simple and bold, no eyes, ears, or mouth. The result is raw and elegant. And now, join us for an interview with the artist, Don Gianlanella. Gianlanella's studio was first located in Cooperstown, New York, before he moved to Taos, New Mexico, Los Angeles, California, and finally to St. Petersburg, Florida. He's worked as a graphics producer, receiving an Emmy for his work on Monday Night Football in 1990. He's also taught fine art for Bilkent University in Ankara, Turkey. With a host of public art commissions in California, Florida, Missouri, and New York, as well as the private collections of Angelina Jolie and Howard Stern, Gianlanella's art career has been diverse and prolific. So welcome, Don. We're so thrilled about the collaboration between you, Creative Pinellas, and the Florida Botanical Gardens. It's such a wonderful exhibit, and the placement within the gardens is a really beautiful juxtaposition. So when did you first start making sculpture, and what was your kind of art trajectory that got you to that first sculpture?
My first sculpture, what led me to that? I think that I was always drawn to my abilities with art. In other words, from a very young age, I started sketching, and it naturally led me to the next level, which was sculpture or three-dimensional forms. I had a penchant for putting things together. I remember in my first grade class, we had a special visiting art teacher that came every week or something like that. He went to all the school districts. And he had all these little round beach rocks that he had collected. And he gave them to us kids to glue together and paint. And I made a very compelling face. I think my son has that sculpture. But like right away, I was just drawn to it. The dimensionality of a sculptural object. So I feel like it came naturally, but I did cultivate it throughout my life.
When did you decide that you wanted to be an artist? Was that something that planted in your brain when you were in first grade, or was that something that kind of built over time?
I think that my identity was pretty firmly established as being an artist from as early as I can remember. I just thought that was me. I was an artist. You know, I like I said, I found it to come naturally. I had three older sisters who were artistic, so I had an example that was set for me. I had materials, sketch pads, and pencils. And my parents encouraged me. So I think the combination of those events led me to develop my art throughout my life.
Tell me a little bit about how attending Cooper Union and working with artists such as Louise Bourgeois and Hans Hanke, and living and working in Turkey, how has that influenced you as an artist? And also, I'm going to use this term, an entrepreneur, because I do think it is so important that we talk to the community about the business of art. So take those pieces however you want to take it, but you've had some amazing influences, and I love to hear about what the impact of those people and those places have on you.
Well, in retrospect, I think I was very fortunate to come into the path of some very, very influential artists. Like you mentioned a few. I was in the right place at the right time. Being with Louise was particularly influential to my career, my attitude of being an artist, my commitment to making an artist my lifestyle. I had her as a teacher, and we developed almost an immediate friendship. And then she subsequently asked me to work for her after graduation. And so I got to spend a lot of time with her in the studio, traveling around, going to shows, being her friend. She would cook interesting lunches for me every day, and it was great. But I was so young, I didn't realize the gravity of the situation. I mean, the people that used to come visit her were famous artists and art dealers, and I used to let them in the building. But I think the most important thing that Louise gave me was the commitment to live the lifestyle of an artist, to eat, breathe, drink, think, art. And like her whole house was an art studio. She didn't have a single room that she couldn't do something creative in. And this is in a 5-story brownstone, which she owned the whole thing in Chelsea. It was like a fun house. And of course, another great influence on me was Jim Dine. He was my drawing teacher. And he was just such a cerebral character where, I had formerly only seen people like that who had lofty positions like lawyers or politicians. He carried the mantle of being an artist with such dignity. And I'll never forget that. He was a really, he was a great teacher as well. But, this rarefied air all ended when I left Cooper Union and went out into the real world. And then I was taking a trip back to New York to see my family, who was still in New Jersey. And my sister at the time was a on-air meteorologist for ABC. And she said, well, while you're here, Don, you should go see the art director. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I have my portfolio. It's a bunch of drawings. And I went to see him. And by again, being in the right place at the right time, he was a Cooper Union graduate. He was an older gentleman and rather famous within the business. His name was Ben Blank. And he said, we don't have any Cooper men here. I said, well, now's your chance to revolt the earth of Cooper Union alumnus. And again, I was right at the cusp of the electronic revolution, and the rest is history. I mean, me and my colleagues helped develop the science of computer graphics. We had the first computer graphic machines, and we worked with a company called Quantel in England, and we just rode the wave. It was fabulous.
Tell me some of your biggest joys and biggest challenges of being a sculptor. Because I would imagine that at some days it is the most fantastic thing that you can ever experience. And some days it's got to be frustrating.
Well, some very wise person once said, you don't achieve anything until you're psychically ready to accept it. And with that comes a certain amount of blasé, jadedness, or something like that. I've been working for so many decades. I think, I don't really count, but it's got to be close to 25 years as an independent sculptor. And my work has finally achieved some recognition and praise, which is so gratifying. But, the sort of enthusiasm for creating a piece that, you know, you've worked so hard on has sort of been tempered by the fact that there's so much work involved and there's so much demand and there's so much pressure and stress with these commissions that it's become, you know, like they say, be careful what you wish for. And I always wanted to be given large commissions for public works, but, you know, now I have, it's like a traffic jam. They're like backed up, you know? And, you know, it sounds like I'm complaining, but it's sort of blunted the joy I had as a younger artist just from selling a small piece, you know, that because you progress and you get to the level where it's not about the money or not about, it's just about the being funded for the ability to realize your ideas on a grand scale. And that's what really excites me. Well, you know, I'm a huge fan of language, and I just think it's interesting when I can find words from other disciplines that describe my work more accurately. And a midden is a term that archaeologists use. It's for a cache, a buried cache of objects, artifacts, ecofacts, bones, plants, other materials that have been discarded by a former culture. And I said, that's exactly what these sculptures are. It's kind of like encapsulating objects from our culture and putting them into a sort of a time capsule. And they've aged very interestingly. And it's also about looking at objects from a new perspective. It's like taking, you know, your pet's bowl, which you like, you don't really do any deep thinking about, and putting it into a sculpture, and all of a sudden it changes the parameters and the perspective of it.
Yes.
You know, but the sculpture started from a purely practical standpoint. As a young sculptor, I was using discarded objects. I mean, I was using the detritus of society to create art, which had some zeitgeist to it, you know, as well, which I always liked, but I didn't overanalyze it. I've shifted some of my focus more directly to recycling awareness. I've done, I think, 3 pieces that are displayed at festivals where people can insert their plastic bottles. And the sculpture is kind of a reminder of how many bottles are being discarded every day and not recycled. I have been thinking lately of like, what is the concept of permanence? In other words, is it something that lasts a lifetime, several generations, millennia? I mean, even mountains are worn down into flat deserts over the span of geologic time. So what is permanence? So I was thinking of, I'm developing an idea for a piece. It's more of a conceptual piece where it's made to degrade and erode and fade away over the span of, I don't know, depending on what you use. But I think it's interesting because, like, people, you know, they come back to a monument like the Eiffel Tower. They expect the Eiffel Tower to look the same, you know, if not better. They jazz it up with some LED lights. But, you know, it'd be interesting to say, oh, yeah, there's this sculpture. Oh, it's right over here. And they look at it and it looks totally different. They go, what the hell is this? What happened to it? But, you know, we're all changing, I guess, is the point. I do market. I have to rephrase that. I misspoke. I do market, but I do it mainly through video and interpersonal type things. In other words, getting my work out there. I try to document the work.
Yes.
And, you know, I actually have a friend who runs a public relations firm, and he has been sending out press releases and things like that. But I guess my main marketing thrust is to I try to write every day about what I do, and document the work in process, which comes in very handy whenever people ask me for uh, some words about my work or images. I usually have them. Okay, that's a great question. You talked a little bit earlier about enthusiasm. What's the joy of being an artist and a sculptor? And I was a little bit cavalier about it, but the real aha moment for me is the idea. That's when I really get excited and say, oh, that's it. That's perfect. That's the thing to, and developing that idea. And, it's kind of, I mean, who knows where ideas come from? It's kind of a magical process, but I do realize that I develop my best ideas when I'm walking. And I take several long-hour walks every day, mostly to keep myself moving because of the Parkinson's. But yeah, when you clear your mind of clutter, get away from the computer, get away from the studio, and just walk, things seem to gel. But I think chance favors the prepared mind, because if you don't have the tools and the thoughts and the background, maybe the ideas don't come. The idea is the most important thing. Without the idea, all the rest of it is just fluff, just creating an object that has no gravitas. The ideas are really the fun part of the whole thing. And then the unfun part is realizing them, but there is some fun. But there's a lot of managerial labor that I wish I had somebody. Well, Christo, who just died, yesterday or the day before? I loved his work. It was both conceptual and physical. But what is little known about Christo is that his wife did all the actuating of making these projects happen. Because there's a huge amount of politics involved with wrapping the Reichstag and Central Park. He was the idea man and she was the actuator. So huge credit given to her. Because if she wasn't around, he'd be wrapping gift boxes in Macy's, I think, really. So there's several phases of getting your work out there. And, business people call it marketing. And I guess it is, but it's, which is another subject that's very interesting. How do you market yourself in this day and age? Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Is it direct, advertising in magazines? Who reads magazines?
Tell me a little bit more about how Parkinson's has affected your ability to work or affected your work in an unexpected way.
Yeah, well, it has affected my work in a very basic and profound way, in that I'm losing control of my own body, which is very dismaying and like an emotional and psychological burden that I'm still trying to come to grips with. But it has, as you asked, has ironically expanded my capabilities to a certain degree, because I'm relying, as I said before, on fabricators and helpers and people to do things. And it's almost like teaching in a way, because I taught for a couple of years, and the teacher is also benefiting along with the students, because you're academizing, if there's such a word, your process. And in that, you kind of quantify the things you're doing and look at them in a more exact, formulaic kind of way. And it's almost like that with working with these fabricators, because they ask questions that I wouldn't necessarily ask if I was making the piece myself. So you have to think of more aspects of the work. And so it definitely has expanded my capabilities. In fact, later this year, I'm going to be installing, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 really of my most ambitious pieces that are under construction.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So we'll see how. And also, I kind of want to be an example for people who are struggling, that you can do it even despite your disabilities and your obstacles, because people like Mark DeSuvero, who's a very well-known metal sculptor, and Chuck Close, who has a great disability. They have to strap the paintbrushes to his wrist. He's in a wheelchair. They've been heroes of mine, to work through it and realize that you could still accomplish your art. It's a lot harder. It's a lot more difficult. But, I'd like to be a positive example for people.
Beautiful. You are, Don.
Thank you. Thank you.
You really are. So what do you hope the impact of your work is?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I don't think that's a question that's paramount in my thinking process while I'm developing a piece. It's almost an afterthought. But the main thing is, if it excites me, I hope it excites a viewer, because I'm excited by the concepts, the recycled objects that are in most of my work, the unusual nature of the sculpture, and also I hope to inject some element of humor or joy into it that make people smile and spread good vibes, basically.
For me, that is the most beautiful thing about experiencing your work, is seeing
Thank you.
What it is, what it was, and what it has become.
I think it's like the impact that it makes to put a piece into a new context. It's like I used to have a professor that said, just bringing an object into an art environment like a gallery or a museum elevates it as to a piece of art. For example, Duchamp's urinal, and it kind of works the same with the midden pieces. It's like taking this undignified object and giving it this dignified role as an integral part of a sculpture. Well, I was just given a commission by the city of Orlando to do an assemblage orb for their new fire station number 9. And it's going to be a landmark piece in front of the building. And I proposed an orb, like the one that's in Florida Botanical Gardens, larger, of course, much larger. And it's made up of firefighting equipment, all stainless steel and brass pieces, hose nozzles, sirens, pieces of the fire trucks. And I was actually quite surprised that they chose my idea, because it's kind of a little bit far out, but it's going to be a really interesting piece.
Well, that's about our time, Don.
Thank you for having me.
Gianlanella in the Gardens is currently on exhibit at the Florida Botanical Gardens, located at 12520 Ulmerton Road in Largo. Join us Monday through Sunday from 7 a.m. until 5 p.m. This program is brought to you by Creative Pinellas. Our mission is to facilitate a vibrant, integrated, collaborative, and sustainable Pinellas County arts community and arts and cultural destination. Creative Pinellas is funded in part by the Pinellas County Board of County Commissioners, Visit St. Pete Clearwater, and the State of Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs. For more information on all the programming and resources from Creative Pinellas, visit our website at creativepinellas.org.